Governor, I want to keep moving along because, as I say, there were a lot of things you said in your announcement. You also seem to indicate that as president, you wouldn't necessarily obey court rulings, even the Supreme Court. Here you are.
Many of our politicians have surrendered to the false god of judicial supremacy, which would allow black-robed and unelected judges the power to make law as well as enforce it.
But, Governor, we have operated under the principle of judicial review since the Marbury versus Madison case in 1803.
Judicial review is exactly what we've operated under. We have not operated under judicial supremacy. Presidents Lincoln, Jefferson, Jackson, presidents have understood that the Supreme Court cannot make a law. They cannot make it. The legislature has to make it. The executive branch has to sign it and enforce it. And the notion that the Supreme Court comes up with a ruling and that automatically subjects the two other branches to following it defies everything there is about the three equal branches of government. Chris, the Supreme Court is not the supreme branch, and for God's sake, it isn't the supreme being.
But sir,
it is the Supreme Court.
But sir, George Will, the conservative columnist, has pointed out that back in 1957, another governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, decided to disregard and refuse to obey the Supreme Court's ruling to desegregate schools. President Eisenhower had to call in the 101st Airborne. Are you saying that President Huckabee might decide he wasn't going to obey the ruling on desegregation, or like President Nixon, to turn over the tapes? That, you know, it's up in the air as to whether you're going to obey the Supreme Court?
Well, Chris, as you know, George Will is no fan of mine. He's not very fond of me. He recently called me appalling. So I'm not surprised that he would make such a false comparison. But the point is, in that case, the Supreme Court had ruled, the legislature and the executive branch had agreed with the Supreme Court, and precisely what happened is what should happen. The president ordered the airborne to come in and enforce the law that did exist. But it wasn't that the president defied the law. The president was carrying out the law and using all the forces at his resource to do it.
But, okay, let's say the president decided, I don't like the Supreme Court's ruling on that. Let's say Nixon had said, for instance, in Watergate, I don't want to turn over the tapes and the court can't make me.
Well, the president still has to follow whatever the law is. Does Congress have a law that tells him what he's going to do? In that case, the Congress was ready to impeach Nixon, and he ultimately resigned. I want to get back to the main point here. It's a matter of balance of power. If the Supreme Court could just make a ruling and everybody has to bow down and fall on their faces and worship that law that isn't a law because it hasn't been yet passed, then what if the Supreme Court ruled that they were going to make the decision as to who was going to be the next president and save the taxpayers and the voters from all the expense and trouble of voting, and they'll just pick a president? Well, we would say, well, they can't do that. Why can't they do it? They can't do it because it's not in the law. We are sworn to uphold the Constitution and the law, and it has to be consistent and agreed upon with three branches of government. One can't overrule the other two. That's all I'm saying. We learned that in ninth grade civics, but I'm convinced a lot of Ivy League law schools must have forgotten that simple basic civics lesson along the way.
Governor Huckabee, as I said, an awful lot of interesting things you said in your announcement. I'm sure a lot of interesting things you're going to say in this campaign. Thank you for coming in today. Thank you for sharing your holiday weekend with us. We'll see you on the campaign trail, and we'll keep asking you questions.
All right, Chris. Thanks.